Good evening. This is the Wine of Life podcast. I'm Pastor Wes. Yesterday I talked about the sad state of the SBC and the fact of the sexual abuse report that came out, and there are going to be some updates about that with regards to solutions that some of the candidates for presidency have put forward. And then we'll talk about some church autonomy as well. But today, I told you I'd do one on the ERLC. I also think this is also bad news for the SBC as well, with regards to the fact that cooperative program money was going to defending sexual abusers, covering up sexual abuse, paying for law firms, law advice, and things like that, in order to cover up those things, and we have to consider that. But there's another thing that cooperative program money goes to, and that's funding the ERLC, which is the Evangelical Liberty Religious Commission and Religion Commission, and Religion Commission, something like ELRC or ERLC, whatever it's called. Anyways, I talked about this the other week with the Louisiana bill that got put down, the ERLC, that's right, Evangelical Religious and Liberty Commission, that's right. They were against this bill. Now, I'm not going to speak to the specifics of the bill because I don't know them all, and I read from other pro-life organizations. They were against the bill for other reasons. So all the pro-life groups were actually against this particular bill, but the reason why the ERLC was against it was because they reject, if abortion is criminalized, they reject the prosecution of women. And so Richard Land, who was the former head of the ERLC from 1988 to 2013, decided to write a statement about this. I read from Denny Burke, and Denny Burke has written another blog since about how he feels abolitionists of abortion are being divisive within the convention, and perhaps there's no way to reconcile the two, and I think he kind of wants abolitionists out of the convention. But there's another perspective here that Richard Land puts forward, and he states has been the consistent position of the SBC. He calls the ERLC the so-called conscience of Southern Baptists, and he decided to write, and it was on the ERLC website. It's on landcenter.org now, the article. I'm going to put it in the description so you can read it yourself. He was a pretty big deal. He worked on a religious liberty thing for the Bush administration. He was appointed in, I think, 2001 or 2002. He wrote the Land Letter, which him and four others wrote as a cause for just war to justify the Iraq war. He wrote that in 2002, and that was sent to President Bush, and then it went out to the congregations. So he's quite divisive. He also was on a 25-man evangelical group appointed by President Trump as well. So he has he's been around the big wigs, and he has some what you would call sort of conservative bona fides. But he had to resign in disgrace after it was found. He said some controversial remarks about Trayvon Martin. He said he wouldn't apologize, and then he did try to apologize. But what he was saying on some of his, he had a show called Richard Land Live, and it turns out that a lot of the things he was saying were actually lifted. He plagiarized from on the show. Now, in fairness to him, nothing that he has written has ever been flagged as being plagiarized, but he was passing off people's, whole articles of people and so on, and saying them on his show as if they were his own words. And so he resigned. He quit. That show was taken off the air, and he resigned in 2013. But he has now written an article, and I'm going to go through it. And then I want you to comment, if you're a Southern Baptist, if you think that this has been the consistent view of what a pro-life perspective is. He says, life is full of surprises, some pleasant, some not. I was reminded of this recently as I witnessed a pro-life controversy and debate revolving around an attack on the pro-life movement's incrementalist approach in fighting to protect our unborn citizens by Southern Baptist self-described absolutists who assert that one must demand a ban on virtually all abortions with no exceptions, or one is compromising with evil. To understand my shock at this development, you need to understand the SBC, which is my spiritual home. I was enrolled in the cradle roll as an infant. I was led to the Lord as my Savior at age 6 through a backyard child evangelism good news club sponsored by the church. I was nurtured and discipled in the faith. I was called to preach, trained for ministry, all within a Southern Baptist context. For those in the Southern Baptist family knows what I'm saying. I was a sunbeam. I was a royal ambassador. For several years, I had perfect attendance, pins for Sunday school, and I spent many summers at youth camps Southern Baptist maintained along the Texas Gulf Coast. And I met and married my wife of 51 years, who was also a Southern Baptist minister's daughter. While we were seminary students, I'm profoundly grateful for the rich and spiritual cultural heritage I have been given in the SBC. He says that the SBC has been unapologetically pro-life ever since the conservative resurgence in 1979. I was privileged to contribute to that pro-life effort, having been active in the pro-life cause even before the Roe v. Wade decision in 1973. I advocated for the pro-life cause as a seminary student in 1969 in states like Massachusetts and California, even before Ronald Reagan became pro-life himself in the 60s. Imagine my shock that a scathing critique of the pro-life movement incrementalist strategy as a sinful compromise of biblical principles would arise within SBC life in the resolution on abolishing abortion in 2021 in Nashville. This resolution is not, I believe, indicative of where the vast majority of Southern Baptists are on the issue. Here are the reasons why I believe this. First, the same convention meeting that has passed this resolution also overwhelmingly passed a resolution commending the Hyde Amendment, a classic case of incrementalism in that Hyde forbids the use of federal tax funding or state matching Medicaid funds for almost all abortions, unless Southern Baptists attending the convention were schizophrenic. One of the two resolutions is an anomaly. Now, let me have a word about that. I don't see them as being contradictory. Excuse me. The reason being is the Hyde Amendment was passed in 1976. For many people who don't know, this is in fact 2022. So the issue with the people who were putting forward the resolution was not in not supporting things like heartbeat bills or the ending of Roe v. Wade, as Danny Burke would say, that there are people against that, or the Hyde Amendment supporting that. The reason why there's a frustration is that they feel that places are going more pro-abortion than pro-life, that the actual strategy itself has not worked, and that one of the reasons why Donald Trump made such a big splash, I know a lot of people in the news media have made it out to be that a large amount of white evangelicals, voted for him, and there have been weirdness gone on with that about how he's righteous and, he may be God and things, weird things have come out about that. But the majority of people, and you'll find, Washington Post did a poll about this. Most so-called white evangelicals that voted for him were non-church-going white people. So, make that what you will. The fact is that he gained a lot of support because he made pro-life statements, in that he was calling for the end of abortion, not just, we're going to see if we can pass a heartbeat bill here, we're going to try and stop funds. He was talking about actually appointing judges who would overturn Roe v. Wade, bring it back to the power back to the states to make the decisions on abortion, and then we could vote in people who would then abolish abortion. So that's the situation, and the thing is that's actually come to pass, as we found out from the leaked letter. Now, it may not happen, but we're assuming that it looks like Roe v. Wade will be overturned, and that the states then will again have the rights, as they did prior to 1973, to abolish abortion or not. And so it's not that they were against the Hyde Amendment. It's that federally in 2021, the Roe v. Wade still stood. Now, it's assumed that it won't be standing soon, that it's going to be overturned. That's why the Hyde Amendment is still relevant. Now, if Roe v. Wade's overturned, there are no federal dollars that are going to be or shouldn't be going to any abortions anyways. So, because federally it won't be legal. So that's why you can support the Hyde Amendment and then still be calling for resolutions that the Southern Baptist Convention call for the ERLC and other entities to push and lobby for abolition bills in states. There's a difference between federal support of abortion and state support of abortion. Particularly if Roe v. Wade is abolished, then the Hyde Amendment is irrelevant. If Roe v. Wade still stands, the Hyde Amendment needs to be supported. So that's why you can vote for both of the resolutions. So I don't see them as schizophrenic, and I don't think he should have used that term either to describe these folks. But then he says, second, the abolishing abortion resolution contradicts pro-life resolutions that are incrementalist that they have had over the last 40 years. And one of the reasons is, he says, many of which I helped write. Third, if one has studied the issues of the sanctity of human life within the SBC, it was my business to be fully aware as possible of the pulse beat of Southern Baptists on the abortion issue. Now, I'll again go against this third point. It really doesn't matter what the opinion of the majority of people within the Southern Baptist Convention would hold over the last 40 years, because the situation has changed with regards to whether or not Roe v. Wade will be done away with. So obviously situations are going to change because your opinion is going to change because you have more options now. And also, whatever the majority opinion may be, it may not necessarily be biblical and right. We've just seen that with regards to the sexual abuse report. There are many times that votes came up that if something could be done, a resolution could be made, lists could be made public, and so on, and people voted against it. So it doesn't matter if they're head ethicists that agree with him, or if over the last 40 years people have agreed with his perspective on this. Things have changed, and the majority is not always in the right. But this is what he carries on to say. During those years, with remarkable regularity, approximately 85 to 90% of Southern Baptists, when surveyed, were broadly speaking pro-life. 10% wanted no exception for any reasons. Just under 10% were against virtually any legal restrictions on abortions. About 40% wanted exceptions to save the mother's physical life, and just under 40% wanted exceptions for rape, incest, and fatal deformity in the fetus. And these, he says that these were taken between 1988 and 2013 when he was there. These polls were taken. So the ERLC has a twofold assignment in the from the SBC in the public arena. They are the so-called conscience of the convention. I think that's questionable at this point. The ERLC has the freedom in that role to call Southern Baptists to be where they believe they should be on moral issues like abortion and an understanding of biblical revelation. And during my tenure, the position we called Southern Baptists and other people of faith to embrace was that God is involved whenever conception takes place, and every abortion stops a beating human heart. We argued that not only a morally valid reason for taking an unborn baby's life was to save the mother's physical life. The ERLC's second assignment was to make the three branches of the U.S. government, the United Nations, which is odd, I didn't know they were involved in that, and the public at large aware of where Southern Baptists actually were when a consensus position on various issues developed amongst Southern Baptists, as opposed to where we might have desired them to be. Accordingly, when the ERLC submitted an amicus or friend of the court briefs on abortion cases, we informed the Supreme Court that while the majority of Southern Baptists were opposed to abortion on demand, there were significant disagreements on what it came to some of the troublesome exceptions. Consequently, I signed a statement by 7 leading Southern Baptist ethicists on why we opposed an anti-abortion resolution at the SBC. Again, it doesn't really matter what the 7 leading ethicists decide on these cases. It matters what's right and what's not right. So I'm against these sort of appeals to certain types of authority. But he says, but in the interest of clarity, and so there's no misunderstanding, allow me to state my personal opinion on abortion. He says this opinion has not changed from 1969 onward. I believe that life begins at conception, and that abortion is always the taking of a human life. I believe the only morally valid reason for aborting a preborn human being is when the preborn baby is a direct threat to his or her mother's continued physical existence. I believe God is involved whenever conception takes place. We may be a surprise to our parents, but we're not a surprise to God. Each of us was once a child, an infant, a fetus, but none of us was ever a sperm or an egg. But since I'm not a pacifist, I believe it's morally permissible to protect a human life that is in peril by taking a human life, if that is the only life-saving option available. So how do other pro-life Southern Baptist leaders and I answer the charge of the abolitionists when that say we're compromising with evil by accepting an incremental approach to protecting the unborn and their mothers from abortion? First, he says when Roe was issued in 1973, the pro-life movement was presented with an imperial judicial fait accompli, striking down virtually all the restriction on most of the laws in the various states. As Benjamin Witz, the senior fellow at the very liberal Brookings Institution, correctly concluded, Roe is a lousy opinion that disenfranchised millions of conservatives on an issue about which they care deeply. As a consequence, virtually the entire Protestant Catholic pro-life coalition embraced the incrementalist approach in order to save as many unborn babies as possible. That is, there were political necessities involved to their positions, not moral necessities. And that's where I think where there's a big difference in 2022 and what was happening in 1973 and 1976, 1984, etc. I think that's important to notice those distinctions. They did this after the pro-life movement advanced several human life amendments to the Constitution and proposed sweeping legislation that dealt a death blow to abortion on demand. The pro-abortion movement defeated all of those initiatives. In response, the pro-life movement tried to save as many babies as they could. For example, they passed the Hyde Amendment, which saves an estimated 60,000 lives per year since 1976. In other words, there has not been legislation moved forward since 1976. I think that's telling. That's not really incrementalism even. That's kind of a standstill. But should the pro-life movement incrementalists by political necessity rather than preference? So he acknowledges that the incrementalist approach was not by preference because it's not that which is morally correct. It is by political necessity. Have let these babies die because all the babies, because we couldn't abolish abortion. Should we have sacrificed the babies on the altar of the abolitionists' ethical purity and their more pro-life than thou argumentation? And then he gives an analogy here, and I think it's a very poor one. He says, what if I came upon a wrecked school bus that had plunged into a river with 60 school children on board? Since I can't save all of them, should I do nothing? I think not. I believe God would have had me plunge in and save as many as I could, going back again and again to save as many children as possible. Deciding to save none of them because I can't save all of them would have been the wrong option. Here's the problem with that. No one is saying that there needed to be purity in the last, say, 40, 50 years. What we're now saying is that the state, right, to use the same analogy, the state is giving you the option of building a guardrail so that the school bus never goes over the bank into the river, so that the children are not at risk at all. We're talking about if Roe v. Wade is overturned, the complete abolishing of abortion in states means that the children never have to be plunged into the river at all. So there is no he's not framing this appropriately at all. That is why there will be still people supporting the Hyde Amendment and still supporting the abolishing resolution. And so he's not framing this appropriately. But then he gives an example, and I think this also is framed not right at all. He says, during my tenure as president of the ERLC, I received a phone call from a Southern Baptist pastor. The pastor was in the intensive care unit of the emergency room with the chairman of his deacon. The deacon's wife was in a catastrophic automobile incident and was hovering between life and death. In extremely critical condition, she was also pregnant. The doctors on duty were in unanimous agreement that if they were not allowed to take the baby at 12 weeks, then both mother and baby would die because of the strain on the critically injured mother's heart. The pastor informed me, said, I need my wife and 3 other children, need their mother. Can I give the doctors the go-ahead to take the baby? The pastor asked me what to do. I answered, I do not believe you should tell him he can't. He must seek the Lord's guidance and make the decision himself. He said, what would you do if it were you? He said, I would authorize the procedure to take the baby to save the mother of my children, but I would not judge him if he made a different choice. He then asked the question, would the abolitionist really argue that the government should tell him he can't make that decision to save his wife's life? I fear they might, and they would be wrong. Well, I think there's another issue. There's another perspective here, is that the taking of the baby would not be an abortion because the baby would be delivered. They wouldn't they wouldn't crush the baby's skull or pump it full of poison and then dismember the body parts. They would actually deliver the baby, and the baby would sadly die, because sometimes people die. So trying to save a life, delivering a baby would not be the same thing. Now, it might statistically count as some sort of an abortion, as sometimes miscarriages are counted that way and stuff. But in terms of the way that you would look at that situation, of course, that would not count as an abortion. Now, some people are, extremists and might say that it would be, but then they would both die anyways if you didn't take the baby. So actually delivering the baby and the baby not being able to survive would not be the same thing as an abortion. And I think he knows that most of the people who are talking about abolition are talking about people who have free elective abortions. In this case, the woman herself is not even choosing to have the baby taken. She's in critical condition. She can't even make the decision herself. So this is not applicable really to what the abolition movement is really talking about. He says, the next part, which is, I think, has caused a great deal of problems. Another argument advanced by the abolitionists is to be open to criminally charging pregnant mothers in cases where the child is aborted. From the beginning of my involvement in the pro-life movement in 1969, we have overwhelmingly perceived mothers as victims, not perpetrators, of abortion. That certainly has been and continues to be my understanding, belief, conviction, and experience. I have over and over again heard pro-life advocates passionately argue that any abortion, there are at least 2 victims, the aborted baby and his or her mother. It is this disagreement over holding the mother legally accountable that has led to the latest controversy within the Southern Baptist Convention. Now, here's the thing. With regards to the pro-life movement, that's a patently false statement that it has always been held that way. In fact, Tom Askell recently wrote an article about this, and he was on a radio program saying the same thing. And then Christianity Today wrote an article about that interview that he did, where he made the analogy that the woman is like hiring a hitman when she's having an abortion. She is legally responsible for the murder of the baby. And the thing is that the Christianity Today also uses a quote from Pope Francis, who uses the same analogy. And there are multiple posts prior to that. And Richard Land has talked about before how the pro-life movement was a Catholic movement for many, many years. In fact, the Southern Baptist Convention did not become pro-life until 1979. And even before Vatican I, before any of this, most evangelicals, Baptists alike, thought that life began at breath when they were born. They did not believe in life at conception. So that's why there's a 1971 resolution that's pro-choice within the SBC. The Catholics have always claimed that the mother is committing a murder. And that was the pro-life position going back to the 50s. I mean, the Vatican II was in 64, and after Vatican II, there was some more, coalitions built between Catholics and evangelicals. But all the way up to that point, Catholics have always stated that the mother is responsible. So to say that since 1969 there have always been people who have held that the women that are not responsible for the murder of the baby is not true. He says now they're calling for the defunding of the ERLC because Brent Leatherwood signed an open letter to state lawmakers from America's leading pro-life organizations. The open letter, signed by virtually every major pro-life organization in America, says women are victims of abortion and require our compassion and support, as well as ready access to counseling, social services in the days, weeks, months, and years following an abortion. The letter concludes, as national and state pro-life organizations representing tens of millions of pro-life men, women, and children across the country, let us be clear, we state unequivocally, we don't support any measure seeking to criminalize or punish women, and we stand firmly opposed to include such penalties in legislation. In other words, if an abolishing abortion legislation bill came up, they would oppose it if it had in there that women would be prosecuted for abortions. So I would like to ask Southern Baptists, and just anybody, if you're in the subject, if you are pro-life at all, do you genuinely believe that women are actually victims of abortion on the same level as the baby? This is an odd one to me. And do you think if abortion is criminalized, remember it's not criminalized yet, we're talking about hypotheticals, if it's criminalized, should women be prosecuted or not? I think logically, yes. Now I think there's going to be levels to it, just like we have with murder, homicide, first degree, second degree, third degree, all that. He says this, though, about that, what Brent Leatherwood signed. He says, if I were still the head of the ERLC, I would have signed this statement and have been ashamed if I didn't sign it. In other words, the ERLC has apparently always been, at least since he was the head of it, since 1988, they've always been opposed to abolishing abortion if certain criteria weren't met regarding these things with women. And we've seen this from some others regarding certain other policies like health care and things like that. He says this is precisely the moment when the SBC and the pro-life movement have never needed the ERLC more. I don't know about that, but he said calling for the defunding of the ERLC is instead of that, we should be calling everywhere to lift up the ERLC. Because they're still looking for a president. Brent Leatherwood is just interim right now. They don't have one, I guess. But I think, to me, I talked about yesterday how the sexual abuse report kind of shows that we were using money to support abusers, and why I want a resolution to open the books so that we know where all the money is going. There's a lot of money going to the ERLC, and apparently the ERLC has not been on the same page with, it's certainly with me. I think if I asked many congregations, I think if I asked the congregation at my church their views on abortion, do they want it abolished? If Roe v. Wade is overturned, would they want abortion abolished in the state of South Carolina? I think they would say yes. And I think that if we talked about the legalities of this, I think that if it was criminalized, logically, the women would be responsible. I don't think that people just automatically see women as victims. There was a video with I think, what was his name, Mike Johnson, Representative Mike Johnson, where he's speaking to a woman, and she says that she understands that there's no difference between a baby in the womb and a 2-year-old, but she feels that the woman has responsibility to her body. She can do whatever she wants. Well, she's acknowledging murder, and she's not. There's no ignorance here. It's not like they're acting like they don't know they're killing someone. So, in what sense are they a victim? I just find that a very bizarre perspective. I don't, I'm not really sure what to say about this. I thought that there were some issues. I know there's always going to be arguments, but I thought generally within the SBC there were certain things that we understood and we all held the same perspective on. And apparently we don't at all. We don't hold the same perspective on things like pastoral qualifications. We found that out in the report. Many people found that liability, fiscal liability was actually more important than pastoral qualifications as given in the Bible. And I also assume that the entities within the SBC, especially the policy-making one that lobbied, held the same values that I held. but they don't. So this is a quote from a Roman Catholic apologist they're having the same issue within the Catholic Church. His name's Trent Horn. But this is his position on this, and I think it's one that I would hold. He says, a message to left Caths. He's talking about Catholics who are left-leaning. He says, who say you're pro-life, but you want abortion to remain legal. And this is the issue we're in now. They're talking about opposing legislation that would make abortion illegal because women would be prosecuted. He says this, you are not really pro-life. Your position is almost identical to that of pro-choicers who believe abortion is wrong, but they want to make abortion safe, legal, and rare by combating poverty. And I feel it's the same thing. They're saying abortion is wrong, but they want to protect this sort of victim class of whatever, I guess, a woman is supposed to be involved in some sort of victim class that she's a part of. And in order to protect her, then abortion should just remain legal. And that is not the position that I've ever held. I don't know about you. I would like your opinion on that. And remember, if you like the channel, go ahead and hit subscribe and all that stuff. But let me know if if you hold the same position, and if this is surprising to you that the SBC has held this position at least since the 80s, I guess, which is pretty shocking because we weren't a pro-life group before the 80s. So, I guess I guess they went from pro-choice to sort of pro-life, and now we're trying to move it on to full pro-life. I don't know. Maybe there's a progression we're going through. I'm not sure, but it was surprising to me that he wrote that, and it's surprising to me that the ERLC holds this position. But you let me know what you think, and I will talk to you later.